What a great song. We love that, don't we? There's Regard playing at GTFM and Ride It at 17 minutes after 11 o'clock. So with COVID-19 dominating everyday life at the moment, and with different political views on how to tackle the coronavirus threat, it's nice to talk to somebody now who's been inside the Westminster bubble, but these days can take a view from the outside looking in. Joining me is former MP for Pontypridd, Dr Kim Howells. First of all, good morning to you, Dr Howells.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Very good. I've been down Pontypridd Market, marvellous place, and it's great that it's open again. There's such lovely people working in there.
Yeah, good. Now then, before we talk about your distinguished career, born in Merthyr Tydfil and raised in the Cynon Valley.
That's right. There was no maternity wing in November 1946. My mother told me, and so I was born over in Merthyr, and I'm very proud of it, actually. Great town, Merthyr, but I'm an Aberdare boy, raised, and that's where I learned everything.
So you actually educated in the Aberdare Valley as well, as they used to call it, of course, these days called the Cynon Valley?
Yeah, we moved into a brand new council estate in 1951, 52, and I was one of the very first pupils in the junior school that was built there with the council estate. Marvellous school, and then I managed to pass the 11 plus, and I went to Mountain Ash Grammar School.
Oh, very nice. Well, I went there, but it was a comprehensive school then, because it changed, I think, in the mid-60s, 1965, I think.
Something like that, absolutely.
Yeah. So, were your parents politically minded themselves? Were they always Labour, for example?
Oh, I mean, our house and the whole family, my uncles, my aunts, everyone was passionately political, but they weren't all in the Labour Party. God, they ranged from, I had a cousin over in Bridgend, for example, who was a rank Tory.
All right.
Anyone I ever met, really. But my dad, up until the invasion of Hungary in 1956, which he hated, he was a communist, and really remained a communist, as kind of Christian socialist throughout his life, really. My mother described herself as chapel, though none of us ever remember her going to a chapel, and I think she used to describe herself in that way in order to oppose my father. So it was a house that we were always arguing, unusually about politics.
That was her way of getting your dad back then, was it?
Oh yeah. She had very strong opinions of her own, and we were always taught as kids, that look, no matter what the conventional politics may be, and no matter what maybe you should say or shouldn't say, just speak the truth as you see it, and that's the way we were brought up, really, and that's what I try to stick to.
Now, coming from the valleys, Kim, it's fair to say that everybody normally had a grandfather, a father, an uncle, a brother or a son working in the South Wales coalfield before its very quick demise, of course, in the mid-1980s onwards. Now, you worked as a researcher and an editor for the South Wales Miner. That was a magazine, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I'd come back to South Wales in 1979, and I'd been working through the 70s with the National Union of Mineworkers, and I'd been employed in the early 70s as a coal miner. I worked underground, but in Yorkshire, at Thornhill Colliery near Dewsbury. And so I'd been linked with the coal industry for a very long time. And I wrote my PhD, my doctorate, on the coal industry between 1937 and 1957. So, I'd been steeped in it ever since I could remember, and my research was about coal and so on. And when Emlyn Williams, who was then the president of the South Wales Miners, offered me a job there, I went to work for the NUM, and And just in time, of course, for the series of strikes that culminated in the huge strike of 1984-85.
Now, Emlyn Williams, of course, himself a Cynon Valley boy. Come back, I believe, Kim?
He was in school with my father, and they were young men in the Second World War, and they knew each other very well. I remember that at the height of the miners' strike, when the South Wales miners' leaders weren't allowed to speak because they were being threatened with having their houses taken away and going to jail and so on because of a kind of legal thing that was happening at the time. I became the spokesman, and my father and Emily Williams bumped into each other in Aberdare one day, and Emlyn said to my father, "Well, Gran," he said, "I haven't made your son rich, but I have made him famous."
Dear. Well, you're saying that, you see, because my dad, Ken Williams, he used to work with Emlyn. His joke was, Emlyn was in work today, he stayed for about 10 minutes, and then he had to go to a union meeting.
Oh yeah, that sounds like Emlyn. He was a pretty amazing guy, actually. You know, when you think that this area has thrown up leaders like that, you know, because like my dad, you know, they didn't have a great education, but by God, they had a wonderful education outside of school. You know, they grew up in communities which were rich in culture. You know, they had created their own working class culture. It was absolutely amazing, and Emlyn had a tremendous range of knowledge, like all of that gang of men that I knew, that I grew up with, you know, and looked up to in Aberdare at that time, and it was the same in the Rhondda, and it was the same in Pontypridd, and over in the Rumney and Merthyr. It was an extraordinary generation, really. The generation, of course, that defeated fascism and the Nazis in the Second World War. It was an extraordinary generation.
And it was, you mentioned the miners' strike, it was the Pontypridd office where you were based, Kim, wasn't it? And of course they coordinated that particular strike. But it was such an awful time for so many people, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a terrible, terrible time. You know, people tend to romanticize all this now, but you know, anybody who'd experienced families coming into the office who just didn't have enough to eat. I mean, marvelous things went on, you know, organizing food kitchens, and we created a kind of alternative welfare state in a sense, but everybody was pulled together, you know, and I mean, my wife and I, we had our first son during the strike, in the April of the strike. You know, great timing.
Yeah.
He didn't earn any money for a year, and yet we never went without food. You know, people gave us food, and it was in so many ways a wonderful experience and a terrible experience, and all those. You know, those 30,000 mining jobs that went in Wales as a consequence of the closures in the 1980s. You know, it was a rough time, and people tend to forget those terrible aspects of that strike as well as remembering the good ones.
Now, Arthur Scargill, did you think, when you look back now, 35 years on, the big mistake he made was not having that ballot?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I really never understood Arthur Scargill at all, actually, and I got a lot of stick for opposing him during the strike. It seemed to me that well, the miners were lions led by donkeys, really. They made wrong decisions time and time again. I think Arthur Scargill's big problem was that he really believed that he was a kind of revolutionary leader. And trade unions are not revolutionary bodies. Trade unions always have to compromise in the end. That's how you make progress. That's how you get better conditions and wages. But Arthur never saw it like that. He saw his task as really defeating the Thatcher government and bringing down capitalism. And I'm afraid that miners and mining, certainly at that time, were the sacrificial victims of that kind of megalomania, really.
So after the very sad death of Brimo John, you became Labour MP for Pontypridd in 1989. That must have given you great satisfaction, Kim.
Well, I mean, I'd never ever even thought about becoming an MP, and I remember I think I only had the nomination of about 2 branches in Pontypridd, but by that time I'd become quite well known. I was just very lucky, actually. I was a lucky devil in the right place at the right time, and a couple of branches nominated me, and that I wasn't even the NUM's nominee.
Really?
Yeah, that was the great Terry Thomas, who was the vice president. Terry's gone now. He was a wonderful vice president, but I'd been active in the local branches, and I guess when people said, "Why didn't you have a go?" I thought, well, why not? And there we are.
Now, you held a number of posts in government. Which ministerial post did you enjoy the most, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had 6 different ministries through that period of the Blair and Brown governments. John Reid and I used to argue about who had been the minister in the most departments, and he used to say to me, "You've been in education twice, so that doesn't count really. That only counts once." But the one I enjoyed most, without any doubt, was working in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and I had responsibility there in that department for counter-terrorism and for the Middle East and most of the war zones, and that meant going to those places. I wanted to go there and see what our troops were suffering and put up with, and those were experiences I will never forget.
You could have been James Bond's boss then.
I was James Bond's boss because I chaired the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is a very special committee. There's a big row about it now because it hasn't been appointed since this government came to power, and that oversees the work of MI5, MI6, GCHQ, and various other intelligence bodies and agencies. So, I was very much part of that.
Okay. Now, you served under several Labour leaders. Of course, Neil Kinnock was the leader when you became MP in 1989. Do you think he was unlucky when he lost to John Major in 92?
Oh, I mean, I think Neil would have been a very fine Prime Minister. He was, he'd taken on a Labour Party to reform a Labour Party which was in a terrible state. I mean, almost as bad as it was before the last election under Corbyn. All the various factions, the Trotskyites and the Stalinists and everybody else had managed to get into the party and basically were wrecking the chances of there being a Labour government. And Neil took them on, and he did it brilliantly, and he rebuilt the party. And when John Smith and then Tony Blair came in, they were able to stand on his shoulders, really. So in many ways, he was desperately unlucky not to have won that election against John Major.
Now, Gordon Brown was the 4th and final leader when he became Prime Minister, of course, in 2007. But had you seen a bit of a decline in the party's fortunes leading up to that 2010 election?
Yes, they could have won that election. I think Gordon handled it very badly, and he and I had fallen out over a number of issues. So I'm not the most objective commentator, but I think it could have been handled much better. In a way, the party had started to distance itself in so many ways from its core support, really. It had become a very what they call progressive liberal party in lots of ways, and it had forgotten that people are very proud of being British, of being Welsh and Scottish and coming from Northern Ireland. There's a degree of patriotism which became very, very unfashionable. And people had worries about things like immigration and and the temporary nature of a lot of employment and so on, and the way in which society was changing, and that was completely ignored really by the leadership of factions, at least of the Labour Party, and I'm afraid that they failed to realise that this great country of ours doesn't all resemble Hampstead and Islington and the more radical bits of London, and we've paid a very heavy price for it. The Labour Party has been marginalised and still is in many ways marginalised. A lot of work to do now under Keir Starmer to try and repair that damage and get back into the centre of British politics.
Now, before you go, we are 102 days into the COVID-19 lockdown. How do you think both the UK and the Welsh governments have handled this health crisis, Kim?
Well, I mean, I don't want to start throwing spears at, the guilty men and women. Mistakes have been made, and hindsight is a wonderful, wonderful thing to have. When you're a political commentator and you're not responsible to anyone for anything like I am at the moment, except arguing with my own family, of course. But I'm not going to blame anyone for the way that it's happened. I think the government in some ways has been cack-handed, but then I look at the way people haven't obeyed the rules in so many ways. I look at the experience of other countries which sometimes have been better, sometimes have been worse. What everybody's got to remember is this: when that terrible virus came out of China, and I blame China for this, by the way, in so many ways, when it came out of China, it caused unprecedented damage. Millions of people afflicted by it. And that's what we've got to learn, really. We've got to learn that we must be prepared for this in the future, that we don't control everything that happens to us, that our artificial political borders are never recognized by viruses and bacteria and by the hackers and poisoners who are at work at the moment. We face some very serious problems from China and Russia, and they're not going to end with the end of this viral crisis at the moment. We've got to be prepared for the next one, and those are the lessons that have got to be learned, and we've got to apply new policies in the future.
Just before you go, how are you enjoying retirement?
Yes, God knows how I ever had a job, actually. You find yourself charging around. I've got my garden to look after, of course, and I'm painting constantly down in my shed. I'm not painting the shed, I'm painting paintings down in the shed, and that's been a wonderful thing. That's helped me a great deal through this COVID business, and I'm writing as well. I'm not writing an autobiography, everybody will be glad to know, but I am writing novels.
Kim Howells, you've had a remarkable career. Thanks for joining us on GTFM today. All the best to you and your family.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
GTFM.